to showboat on the road, shall we? Yeah, boy. We did it. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That hill you see over in the distance there, you can just barely make out the fire tower on the top of that sucker. Stissing Mountain, there's some rain coming down through the valleys. Fulfilling promises. One subscriber at a time. That's Hudson Valley Prepping and Survival. Howdy, folks. Welcome back to Hudson Valley Prepping and Survival. Hey folks, welcome back to Hudson Valley Prepping and Survival. Today is day 1 ham radio class. Christian's here, he's got everything set up. Everything's looking fantastic. Give you guys a little peek ski here.
I'm good for now.
Okay.
The pretzels will come in handy.
Okay, and Christian, how about you? Are you
good,
hungry?
thanks. I brought a sandwich,
Okay, good.
but
Very cool.
Sending helicopters out to people, according to what he was hearing, because he was keeping the network going. It's one, you could call it an extreme example, but one of the things that people out there said was, this was a place where there are no weather emergencies. We've lived here for decades, we've never had a weather emergency. And then came something very different, and they were very glad that there were ham operators. We'll talk a lot more about that later on. First off, I want to thank the Claverick Library and the director, Thea Shoup, who has provided this, and the Friends of the Library is the group that is sponsoring this, represented by Mario here, friend and fellow GMRS user, who was one of the people who sparked this. He was one of the people I knew wanted a ham license. It's part of why I decided to put this together. And then we had a lunch, and in the course of the lunch, Mario said, well, you know, I know people who would like to be in a ham radio license class, but can't be there physically. Wouldn't it be great to do it on Zoom? And I said, Mario, I've got enough to do just putting a class together. And Mario said, I'll cover it. I'll take care of the Zoom. If he had had any idea what it took, he probably would not have said that. But God bless, he has stuck with it and has put in hours on this. Helped very much by Ann in the back there, another GMRS person and a friend of the library. Michael has made the connection to before the wonders of today. He's the one who made the connections amongst most of the people who are attending this through his Hudson Valley Prepping and Survival group. My son, Yarrow, has been major tech support. He's the one who knew about this switching unit, which is what is enabling us to use the multiple cameras in PowerPoint. He's a senior media tech in a college in Northern California, though he's homesteading in Idaho, but he's working remote and he travels to major events over there. So he's provided a lot of technical help for setting this up. And somebody who may is trying to make it, Cody is a fellow GMRS person and my radio buddy, intrepid radio buddy. So thanks to all for that. I'm Christian Swenningson. KD2LIN is my call sign, Kilo Delta 2 Lima India November in ham speak. GMRS is WRJJ 449, Whiskey Romeo Juliet Juliet 449. I've been a ham operator for 9 years. I'm a general class, GMRS for about 3 years. I first got interested in ham radio in high school. I built a lot of electronics kits, was very interested in electricity and the ham world, but I was extremely introverted at the time. And when I came to realize that after you do all this neat stuff with radio, you're supposed to sit down and have conversations with strangers, I've got other things to do. I came back to it as it happened when I was later on interested in environmental issues and resource depletion issues, and came across a poster at my local hardware store, ham radio license class. You know, we need people who can do emergency communications when those are needed. And I have the kind of mind for this, maybe I'll take it up. So I did. I've also have a background, I've always been interested in science all my life, but I also felt a real need to get hands-on experience. I became a professional carpenter, then I became a solar heating installer and then designer. Built, designed, installed hundreds of solar heating systems in Northern California. I became then a high school physics teacher. So I did that for many years. So I've got this, my interest in the education is experience. And I don't believe in teaching people what to think, which is what a lot of education does. It's understanding that I'm interested in, because that's what I need. I'm all self-taught, yeah. And the only thing that the being told what to think, I can't connect with it. You know, I have to find my way into understanding. So that's my endeavor, and I hope to bring some of that about today. Some housekeeping items. Fire escape is straight out that way, the way you came in, straight ahead. The restroom out that door, and all the way to the right is the restroom and drinking fountains. We're going to have a break, and got snacks here. We've now been provided with muffins and brownies. We've got coffee and cider and water over there. Yeah, and for those people in Zoom land, there is, we'll have a Q&A session. First off, there is a place on the Zoom for you to enter questions. And we will be collecting those. We won't normally be answering them in the course of the event, unless it's one that's particularly timely. Ann is monitoring those, and then we'll take up, in general, question and answer time for everybody. Hopefully also we got some questions coming out of your study work. And let me just ask, there. And then the next step, I think, is if we could just go around, and if each of you who is in the room could introduce yourself, where you're from, and what your particular interest is in amateur radio. Deckard?
Yeah, hi, Eckhard Kiesel. I'm from Chatham/Austerlitz up in further north in Columbia County. And I'm interested in what you said, into ham radio for the same reasons you are, but I'm also interested in connecting with the world. I'm German, and I would like to connect more with not just Europe, but the whole world if possible. That's my secondary interest.
Yeah. Bob?
My name is Bob Cholinsky. I'm from Germantown.
Uh-huh.
And it's basically the same thing, just kind of to be able to communicate when needed.
Yeah, great.
I'm Diana. I live in Hudson, and I've been living here for a couple of years. Before I moved to Hudson, I was living in the Pasadena, California area, which has just been through massive catastrophe.
Yeah.
And I there were a couple of things, like a friend of mine suggested that we start doing ham radio just because of like the political situation and stuff like that, which seemed like it would be a really cool thing to do. And also I was like on Blue Sky and sort of watching like ham radio Mastodon people doing very, very heroic work around the fires.
Yeah. Yes.
And it was just very impressive to see, like, I was trying to suss out like what their technical setup was and sort of like, you know, just like seeing examples of it and trying to like reverse engineer, like, what are these people doing? Like, they just are doing this really amazing stuff. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
My name's Mike. I am a licensed ham radio operator. My call sign's Kilo Echo 2 Delta Hotel Romeo. I am also licensed in GMRS, and I'm looking to level up to the next level because, like Elkhart, I would like to talk a little further around the globe, and my license restricts me to regional, so I'm looking to expand a little further
Yeah.
with general license.
Thank you. Nick?
My name's Nick. I live over here in Hudson, Vermont area. Want to do this because I was in the military, I was an RTO, and just want to get back into it.
Good.
I'm Anya. I'm from Pine Plains, Dutchess County. I don't really want to talk to people all over the world, actually, but I like science and technology, and I like learning new things, and emergency type situation I think could happen, and I'd love to be useful. So.
Thank you. Sarah?
I'm Sarah, and I'm from Ghent. Our family has been dabbling a little in the GMRS. We have our license. I don't know our call number by heart. And I guess this just seemed like another step. Plus, I homeschooled my children, so it's also science, practical based, and yeah, seems like a good gateway to
Thank you.
all sorts of things.
Mario, you want to say something?
I'm Mario. I have a GMRS license. Part of a group here in Columbia County and elsewhere, actually, called Resilient Radio. Christian's in it, Eckhart's in it, Sarah's in it, Anna's in it, a number of folks that are online are in it. And I'm interested in getting a ham radio license.
And talking to Italy. Talking to Italy.
Yes, well, yeah, I like to speak to somebody who speaks Italian because I like to learn the Italian language a little bit more. So yes, contact.
Or get it renewed. Thank you. Yeah.
Ann in the back, I don't know if she wants to say anything.
Yeah. Hi, Ann.
So let me also.
Yes.
So I'm looking at the chat here, and there's Michelle from Central New York who says she wants to be able to communicate with family.
Uh-huh. Good. You know, actually, the way that the GMRS group actually came about was that in the midst of the lockdown, people knew that I was a ham operator and started asking me, saying that they want to be able to contact friends and family and colleagues in times of disruption of whatever source it was, whatever sort. And I could tell that most of these people did not want to get as involved as it takes to get a ham radio license, nor did they want all of the capability of ham radio. So I went searching amongst ham radio groups to find ones that were working with their local community in radio, and that's where I learned about GMRS. There are a number of, I had lived in Northern California for many years, and my son and daughter, my daughter's still there, my son was there until a couple of years ago, and they were evacuated 4 times in 3 years. And you find in the Bay Area and north of there, they have a lot of experience with disruptions, fires and floods. 3 of those evacuations were for fires, 2 in 1 year from Santa Rosa. They moved to, I think it's Guerneville, on the Russian River, to be protected from fire. Second year they were there, they were evacuated for a flood. Had 4.5 feet of water in their house. My son decided to go homestead in Idaho. My daughter's still there, but the point is that they have a lot of need for and experience with emergency communications. And so ham radio clubs there are working up networking in their communities, and so they have GMRS. It's a local, but because of repeaters, it makes a good reach, and it has enough strength that you can easily contact 10 or 15, 20 miles simplex without a repeater. And then there's FRS, Family Radio Service. GMRS is General Mobile Radio Service. FRS is Family Radio Service, and that's the little bubble pack radios that you can get at Walmart. It's within the GMRS radio spectrum, but it's very limited in power. You don't need any license at all for that. And so in the neighborhood, every family can have an they cost $5 or $10 for those radios. They don't reach very far, but they do connect with one another, and they can connect with somebody in GMRS who can reach further. And then the GMRS can reach hams who can reach a long ways. You know, GMRS, for the most part, is limited with the repeater to maybe a 50-mile radius, 50-mile circle, depending on the repeater. And so that gets into county-wide kind of thing, depending. But that kind of range. But with ham radio, with something called NVIS, that we'll hear more about, that is a 350-mile radius, and it's very solid. And its characteristic is that it's really radiating up into the sky and reflecting back down, and so it comes down on the other side of mountains. Mountains don't get in the way. Very good stuff for around here, for instance. So I learned about that, and so I studied up on GMRS, got my license, got some radios, started learning about their particularities, and then started giving workshops. I've given 10 workshops and one other ham workshop with that, and there are a lot of people licensed through that. So one picture from that is the importance of networking and of an intentionality which has some people willing to listen in order to be able to reach out and pass word around or receive it and give it into their local community. It's a picture we'll talk further about later on, but that's how I came into it.
Christian, can I just ask?
Yes, please.
So this resilient radio group that we have maybe 30 of us, 30 plus members, participants. Prior to getting the repeater that Christian mentioned, it was very difficult for us to communicate with one another because of hills, mountains, and all these obstacles. So we put up a repeater across the river, and since then, a number of us are able to communicate from Columbia County to Greene County to Rensselaer County to Albany County. So it makes a world of a difference.
Yeah.
But it's not like a ham operator where you can communicate across the globe. So I just want to point that out.
That's a good point.
FYI, we have 8 attendees online.
Good. So the class, you got some notion of where we're going with what I just said, but the broader picture, what the aims are, this is a really unusual ham license class. When I got my license, I had a very good teacher, Wayne Gearing, K2WG, has been a ham for at least 40 years. His day job is a middle school science teacher. He is a fire chief in East Chatham. He trains a lot of people in the fire services all over the county in the Northeast. He regularly is a radio operator at the Boston Marathon. So he knows teaching, he knows ham radio. And when I got out of the class and got my technician license, I didn't know how to operate a radio. I didn't know how to put up an antenna. it happened that in Columbia County, I joined the local radio club. I'm now the secretary, and I publish a newsletter for the club. And I'm in the Columbia County ARES, which is Amateur Radio Emergency Service group. And in that group had, it's taking a break right now for a number of reasons, but we had a weekly net where we check in on radio on Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock. And that was my radio experience. I could do that, just put in the frequency and push the button. I took a long time to learn the particulars, and partly that's just how it is with anything, because there's so many different directions it's possible to go, and nobody knows everything. But at one point in the class, Wayne gave us each handheld radios so that we could have a radio experience at home, just listening. And so the next day I got up and turned on the radio, and I'd listen to some people talking on their commute to Albany. And then I tuned around to see if I could find other conversations. I couldn't find anybody. And I also couldn't find my way back to where I'd started, because I had no clue about how to operate that radio. And that is typical of license classes. Now, the way we're doing this class is that the licensing part of it is up to you. That's the hybrid. That's why you've got the videos. That's why you've got the practical exams. I'm here to help. But it's on you to do the study. I'm here to help. I've already had a phone conversation. I've had a couple of email exchanges. I'm happy to text, email, or telephone, set up a time and telephone, and we've got time here for what it is that you want something concentrated. And there's some of it I'll be concentrating on, but I'm aiming to go much more in depth in a certain way about what radio is and electricity is, from a practical standpoint and from an understanding standpoint. So I want you to be able to set up a radio station. Have some ideas about picking radios. Understand how to operate a radio. In the essentials, you can go anywhere with it with complicated, but the essentials are pretty straightforward. The GMRS people have operated the most basic part. In the class I'd pass out radios and people would turn them on and dial a little bit and talk to one another. The essentials. It's a little bit more complicated when we're off of the GMRS, which has channels. But anyway, it's to be able to set up a station, whatever that means. The essentials, the essential understanding of the cabling and what needs to be connected to what, and to be able to operate it. All right? And then electricity is actually what this is all about. Everything about radio is electricity. You have to have electricity to power it. It does things with the electricity, and then so it's surprising to me that I'm on a number of email and Facebook groups especially for new hams. So I'm interested in the education part of it, as well as something called Elmers. Elmers is a name in ham speak for helpers. It's usually somebody who's got experience, and they're there to be a friend, answer questions, give guidance. So there are a couple of good Elmer groups on Facebook as well. I read those. It surprises, some of the questions and misunderstandings about the basics of electricity really surprise me in one sense and they don't in another, only because I know that we're so digitally oriented and our experience is so digitally mediated these days that electricity is just assumed to be something like, we know computers all need electricity, so that must be electricity, and it's just full of digits, and you can do all kinds of stuff. Electricity is really physical. And the physical understanding is really important. If you're going to wire up a radio, that aspect of it is important to have some understanding of. And likewise, the next part of radio is in radio speak, it's RF. And you hear that word, it's radio frequency is what the letters mean. The initials are for radio frequency, but it's the radiation, the technical term is emissions of radio energy is what that word is referring to, the RF. So it's this emissions, this energy that goes out into the world is another thing that needs some understanding, and it has some very interesting characteristics. But again, there's a lot of misunderstandings because it's not really taught, and so people don't have an easy way to get that in any understandable way. So that's something that I feel is really important. We're going to start with that. And lastly comes sort of the connected aspect that I know are on many people's minds, and that is two sides to it. One of the things that happens, you get, also in the Facebook is some GMRS groups, and it's especially there, people get a radio, and they turn on the radio and listen around, and there's nothing there. Well, it turns out they're the only one with a radio in, 50, 100 miles. It's got to be two-way. And more particularly for us, what's great about this gathering is that from two different groups, people are connected already. They have a connection. And from that connection, what I'm hoping will come about is some networks where people are deliberately saying, let's get together on the radio at such and such a time on such and such a day, and just do that as a discipline. Networking in networks on radio, what that basically means, now there's the broad stroke of what a network is, but a net is a term in radio, and what it basically means is that there is an agreed upon time and place, the place is a frequency, where people meet, and then somebody is what's called a net control operator. So there's a formal side to it, because without it you have chaos. And if you're going to be able to operate, especially if things are a little bit dicey, you need discipline, and it's a basic friendly discipline, but the net control operator is the one. People call to the net control operator and get permission to go on talking, and usually with a check-in, whoever's net control operator will make a list and then read through the list and call on people in order to contribute. And out of that can develop conversations and such what. But that is an important part of radio. We'll go more into that also later on. Yeah. Any questions at that point? I also, I guess, say in a certain sense of housekeeping is that for the most part, most of what we'll be getting in these times is not about the license itself, the license test itself. It's the meat instead of this thin part that's a part of the testing. Now, as I've said, the other part of it is what comes from you about what you want to understand more about. And we'll be doing some things that are directly related to the license. But for the most part, it's to take it in rather than need to be able to repeat it back, if you know what I mean. It's toward the understanding. You're not tested on this part. I think you'll often find that having that understanding will help you on the exam, because it will be obvious that certain of the multiple choice test questions will obviously be off the wall if you got any understanding. Yeah. So I mentioned, well, we've mentioned repeaters. What I'd like to do is, let me ask you this. How many people, since we're doing ham radio here, how many brought your transceiver with you? Michael did. Anybody else? It's a trick question. It's a trick question. Anybody have one of these?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
You know that there are at least 3 transceivers in this? You know about the cell phone transceiver. Transceiver means transmitter, receiver, receive. Yeah? You send out, you receive back. Cell phone transceiver. There's a Bluetooth transceiver in here. There's a Wi-Fi transceiver in here. So each of you probably has at least 3 transceivers that you are quite used to using. And of course, it's the classic thing, who needs ham radio? We've got cell phones. Except when we don't. You know, there is, well, let me just go with this a little bit. This is from pre-PowerPoint. It has its place.
Someone has great handwriting.
That's a teacher
So this is we want to talk about how a cell phone system actually works. You know that I cannot reach anybody in this room directly with my cell phone. Yeah? You're in this room with your cell phone, I've got my cell phone, I cannot talk to you with my cell phone. Unless I go way outside this room, basically, yeah, well, I don't know where it is right here as it happens, but there are cell towers. Everybody's seen these cell towers, and they are actually radio repeater systems. Yeah, and this is an illustration. This is a cell tower, or an antenna, and actually repeater, transceiver up here, another one over here. Here's a couple of cell phones. The cell phone actually communicates with the cell tower and the repeater on the cell tower. What a repeater does is that it receives a radio transmission, and at the same time it transmits, it repeats, passes on that transmission. And we'll learn a little later about why that needs to be actually at, you don't notice it with cell phones, but it can't receive and transmit at the same frequency, or it would blow out the receiver. Main picture is simply that the cell phones transmit to the cell tower. The cell tower, if the person you're calling is nearby, like, okay, this one sent radios up to here, cell tower repeats it back down to this one. Within the reach of the cell tower, and the reason it's called cell is that the area that it reaches is the cell. And if you think of a checkerboard, and each square in the checkerboard is a cell, in the middle of it would be a cell tower. And each cell has a cell tower, and they communicate with the towers communicate with one another. That's this signal up here. In this one, it's microwave, that's common. There's also, can go through cable, internet type cable, to the other tower. And the other tower then retransmits it. So that's how this radio here is receiving the signal. This cable could be undersea going to Europe. Yeah, the distance isn't relevant. The concept is the same. So it's a repeater that takes a signal and rebroadcasts it so that it can, and it's a stronger signal. It can pick up a weak signal from you, amplify it, and send it out strong and clear. Now there's a reason that this is highlighted in red, is because all of that depends on the grid. The power, the electrical power that runs it. A lot of them have some backup. Electrical generators, relatively limited because it costs money and they're in business. When the grid goes down, the cell towers generally go down pretty soon. There are ways that they can bring in emergency ones. There's ways they can, some of them have more backup, but that's limited. Now there's another really interesting aspect to this, a hidden one. A couple of years ago, there was a big windstorm in this area that took down a lot of trees, and we lost internet at my house. And in our area, there are 2 internet providers only. One of them went down. Why? Because one of those trees happened to go down on one of the wires that fed the internet substation in Kinderhook. And so that linking system that brought in the internet to our area went down. Okay, it's a nuisance. Well, the cell phones stopped working very well. Now, why did the internet going down affect the cell phones? Because the cell phone systems have a limited capacity. This is where electricity gets real. It's not just the case that because you've got a repeater up there that it can take an infinite number of calls coming in. You know, they size those, they make their investment according to how many people are going to pay to use them. So they're all limited. Now and so what was happening was, one thing, people were making phone calls because they didn't have anything to do without the internet, but the other thing was that people were using their cell phones for internet hotspots and loading up the cell system so that its capacity was what we call degraded. Sometimes you could get through, sometimes you couldn't. Maybe you could send a text but not make a voice call. More extreme example, the man I mentioned, Wayne Gearing, the fire chief, part of their territory in East Chatham is I-90, the interstate, Albany to Boston. And to Boston especially. And it's on that side of it that he was. So there was a major accident there. It actually shut down all 4 lanes going west. He was there with his fire trucks, and he was in charge of the whole scene because there's a protocol for emergencies, something that we may learn about a little later on. But he's in charge, and he looked around there at the trucks, the semi-trucks that were turned over, for instance. And he said, you know, we have to shut down traffic here. The accident was only on 1 or 2 lanes. I said 4 lanes. The accident was on 2 lanes. They had to shut down all 4 lanes because it was too dangerous. They had to get in there with big equipment and try and get these trucks out of there and such what. There were fire hazards. Okay, so that's a big deal. What's that got to do with cell service? There was a cell tower. He could look up from where he was and see the cell tower, right? There was no cell service. The cell tower was working fine, had full power. But imagine the scene there where people coming from Boston were blocked from traveling. They got on their cell phones to try and make arrangements, to try to find out how they could get somewhere, what detour could they take, let family and friends and business partners know what's going on, and get on Waze and let people know about this. What's happening to people going eastbound? they're all rubbernecking. And they're on their cell phones, and they're telling everybody about this big deal. And they're taking pictures and getting on Waze, and they totally overloaded that cell system. There was no cell service just because of an overload. That's how vulnerable this system actually is. And of course, the internet is actually the same way. I mentioned the time when our internet went down because one station went down. The internet is a series of networks, and there are ways that they can get around. There are other ways that things can be switched around, but it went down for us. And that was very local. The internet is totally grid dependent. So much so that now, as AI is becoming more fashionable, companies are buying power plants. They're buying nuclear power plants to get enough power. They're building enormous photovoltaic systems in order to power their internet systems. It takes a tremendous amount of power. Well, the grid is... I was just talking with somebody who's interested in getting ham licensed. Why? Because his work is cybersecurity. That's his business. And he said everybody in cybersecurity knows that the grid is just inches away from coming down. It's expensive to maintain. And it doesn't get the maintenance that it should. That's why a tree can cause a blackout. One tree can cause a blackout across the whole Northeast years back, but it happened. There are a lot of, and it gets thinner and thinner because of more and more usage. Everybody, green, so to speak, wants to put heat pumps in, electrical heat pumps instead of oil, and electric cars. Well, all of that is more, that electricity has to come from somewhere. And the grid was not designed for it. We'll be learning about this as an important side of the size of the wire matters a lot. And if you've got just so much size of a wire, there's only so much power that can go through, and it can't go anymore. If you put more through it, it turns into the filament on an electric heater. It glows orange, and then a little bit later it melts. Yeah, those are limits, and it's not only do we not invest in it, but actually, if you look into the plans that there are for net zero and such, we do not have enough copper to do that. Period. In the world. It's well known from the people in geology who actually study that kind of thing. So, it's just, pardon?
Hydrogen.
So it's, being prepared for disruption is a good thing. We'll learn a little bit more about that. This is to get some more picture of both, there are two sides to this. The dependencies is one part, but think about what this achieves. What we're able to do because of the networking that this enables. And that concept of the networking is really important, and why I feel so strongly that actually getting working networking to be social, but also, to my mind, it's a social responsibility. It's a community responsibility to get involved in that kind of thing. It's certainly what Mike's been working with his group. I think that's the main thing I wanted from this. Any questions on this part of it?
I have a quick question. The cell towers, do they also not just through the landline or hardwire or the
RF?
Are they also connecting via satellite?
Yes, sometimes.
Okay.
And I say yes, and I don't actually know that.
It's new. It's becoming more popular now.
Well,
T-Mobile just launched with Starlink.
There is a lot where the satellite generally the satellite is the repeater. Yeah, I don't know of repeaters that are using the satellite for this link, which was actually what your question was. On the other hand, the picture of the satellite, in this picture, the satellite is the repeater. And there are amateur satellites, by the way. You can, as a technician, you'll be able to operate amateur satellites.
So it cuts out the one tower, so to say, from cell
That's right.
direct to satellite.
Exactly. That's right. It's the same as this part right here. Yeah.
Excuse me, Christian, we had a question from a participant.
Yes.
About whether internet access is necessary to set up a station. I'm not sure if I understood.
Any ham radio station?
Yes.
No, it's not. And on the other hand, there are a lot of different ways that you can utilize the internet in ham radio, both for setting up your own radio, but there are also a number of ham radio systems that interface with the internet. Echolink in particular is a way that even without a radio, if you have a ham license, with Echolink you can initiate transmissions on the internet and through the internet, and that will go to a linked radio, ham radio, which will then transmit what came over the internet. And then there are others that you can make a bridge. You can access the internet through ham radio.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can you go in a little deeper on that or no? Not right now.
I think to wait on that one. Thank you. Thank you. The next thing I want to mention is just we've already touched on it. It's about what can you do as a technician class operator license, and then in general as a ham operator. But to focus on the technician class, the first thing is that I mentioned the primary. So there are two ways of connecting with radio. One is called simplex, and that's the way that you normally would think of radio. It's from one radio to another radio. The other way is through a repeater. And as Mario mentioned, we put up a very inexpensive repeater at a high spot in Greene County, and it opened up all kinds of things in Columbia County. We could reach places we'd not been able to reach at all in Columbia. It would send all the way across the river to Greene County and come back. And we were reaching, Philmont was a big surprise. The craziest one was Metabee. That's a place where it's in the hills. Didn't expect that, we knew it couldn't be. In fact, I think one of our people, Cody, the fellow that I mentioned, it goes online to a program that's designed for people who are trying to locate repeaters. And you can put in places on the map, and it's got the elevation, it's got the 3D map internally, and it shows if there are things in the way so you can't reach. And Metabee was not supposed to be possible. There are some little aspects of the radio sometimes reaches farther than it should. So the first thing is that being able to access repeaters, depending on the repeater system, well, first off the repeater, so our radio club, Rip Van Winkle Amateur Radio Society, RV Wars, has 3 repeaters in Martindale in Columbia County, a 2-meter, a 220, and a 440 repeater. So reaching those means that you can reach most of Columbia County and a lot of Greene County, except where things happen. If somebody happens to be behind a hill, you might not be able to. But it's a huge reach around the county. And there is this handy repeater book. This one's called Repeater Map, Book, and Directory. Pardon? Ah, thank you. By the way, thanks. I really need that kind of help, right? This is new to me. It's new to us. So there's also an app for this. Yeah? And so what this does is you look up your state and then your town. And it then has a listing like here's Chatham. There is a repeater in Chatham. The frequency is 146.670 megahertz, and it has a tone, something we'll be learning about, of 100.0. I think that this is funny, wonder where they have our clubs. Sometimes it's difficult to find the way a particular, the location repeater is considered to be might not be what you call it locally, the place locally. But they have a map online that it shows the repeaters on the map, so you can dial in on the map, and there'll be the map marker. You see the one that's near you and click on it, and it gives you the information for the repeater that you need to know for the repeater. The next thing is that this system right here exists in amateur radio, and we call it a linked repeater system. And locally, there are two. The N2ACF system, which is operated by NOBARC, the Northern Berkshire Amateur Radio Club, in the Pittsfield area. And they have a whole system up on the top of Mount Greylock. I've been up there. What a spot. Their repeaters actually reach a 125-mile radius. Insane, because they're up there. Normally, it's more like 25 to 50-mile radius. Yes?
Are these repeaters all like open to anyone? Like they just sort of exist, or some like locked down?
So for the most part, yes, they're open. There are private repeaters, more common in GMRS than in ham radio. So all of they would be, the listing would tell you whether it's open or not. Almost all of them are open, but it's good to know that there are a few that are not, because it takes, I can tell you, because of keeping the ones in our club going. Our system, as it happens, we're very fortunate because our club over the years has made serious investment in it. We have quite a solar backup system, very good battery system. We have a generator available to run it, but it can, we upgraded the batteries a few years ago, and it would be unusual. It would take a lot of storm to be able to run that system down. It would take probably at least a week of no sunshine. What we do, if it's really inclement, is we turn off the other two repeaters and we run the 2-meter one, which is the one that has the best reach. So that's that. And then, as I mentioned, NOBARC has a bunch of repeaters up on Mount Greylock at different frequencies, different bands. We'll be learning about those considerations. But also in that area is the N2ACF linked repeater system. So this is this kind of a picture where amateur repeaters also have a link to other repeaters. And whatever is transmitted, whatever is received by one of the repeaters is received by all of them, because the link is simultaneous. And they're all, so they reach from Glen Falls to Long Island.
It's like an all-call on a closed system.
How do you mean?
Like when you make an all-call over a radio.
Oh, I don't.
To reach everyone.
I don't know that one, except what I don't know that terminology myself, but it will be on only one frequency. So it's everybody who's on that frequency. It doesn't go to multiple frequencies. I don't know if that.
So the frequency breaks down. You have multiple layers in that frequency. You have 100 channels in that.
Yeah.
So like when
Okay.
we're with Motorola,
Yeah.
I do production stuff. We have 100 channels
Yeah.
on that one radio.
Yeah.
It's all within like a 1.5 frequency.
So in ham radio, we'll go into this further, but there's something what he's bringing up is Imagine, so there's a fixed set of possible frequencies on a given band to be able to be used. Now, frequency is like what you dial. Remember when radio, anybody have a radio that had a dial? Do you remember that? You button and it goes. Anyway, you're dialing frequencies. You know, you'll see usually that will show you the number 90.7 WGXC, 90.3 WAMC, yada yada. Those particular frequencies. There is the FM radio band, and we'll be talking more about that, but there is a particular band of frequencies, and the 2-meter band is one set of frequencies. It's actually relatively close to the FM frequency band. Well, there's a limited number of those, and if you're imagine being around New York City, where there are thousands of hams, and you run out of frequencies to use. So there is something which is related in a certain sense to what you described. There are what's called PL tones. Originally it was private line. It was a Motorola designation. Besides the frequency on, there is a tone that has to be transmitted to activate the repeater. And there are about 60 of those tones. So it's in effect 60 channels on that frequency. In this realm, there's no all-call. Yeah, I know.
What you said makes perfect sense because we have about 60 channels, so that makes 100% sense.
Yeah.
And we do use Motorola specifically for those as our, people that.
Okay. So, yeah.
So we have an online question from Ken that's kind of like related to what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
He asked, if I use the repeater system from, I guess, Clem Falls to Long Island to talk to someone, does everybody listening?
Yes. There's no privacy in ham radio. Doesn't exist. Yeah, and it's one of the rules. Encryption is not allowed on the amateur bands.
But what about the PL code you just mentioned?
Anybody who has that PL code in. Now, there's two PL codes. There's a transmit code and there's a receive code. Most of the time, both of them are in a given repeater. Sometimes the receive isn't. But anybody, the PL codes are public. Anybody who has that PL code in will hear.
They're public?
Yes.
Yeah, like we can
They are.
in EMS, but you can't respond.
Okay.
It's public information, and there are no limits to who uses that tone. And if you haven't told them that and you want to keep it secret, they can scan for it and know what tone you're using.
Okay.
It's a common feature of radios to have the ability to scan for tones, so that you can find how you can use the repeater. Yeah, privacy is just not a part of amateur radio. There's something that we might get Cody in here to talk about, but there is some. It still has to be public. But mesh-tastic radio is a system which is encrypted, but it's not privately encrypted. You have to have the encryption, but there are a lot more privacy possibilities there. It's a lot more difficult for somebody to access a private channel in mesh radio. So let me ask you, should we go a little longer or take our break now? Okay, because the next thing that I'm actually going to do, let's see. Okay, a couple more networks matters. Where'd the mag mount come from? Who found mag mount? This mag mount just appeared here. Maybe I put it there and didn't realize it.
You did.
Someone came back in with that. I thought it was you. I wanted to get it.
No one else brought one in.
there's been quite a few midnight sessions getting ready for this. You should have seen me trying to drive here this morning, going around in circles. Okay, the N2ACF, there is also GARA, G-A-R-A, Greater Adirondack Repeater Association.
Can you repeat that, please?
What's that?
Can you repeat the?
Greater Adirondack Repeater Association, G-A-R-A, probably .org. They began in our Adirondacks, but they reached through Vermont and New Hampshire and the Hudson Valley. There is, I have a hard time reaching it from I don't have a good location. I'm on beside the Hudson River, but that makes me down low with hills around. They have one in Troy, and they have one in Poughkeepsie, and they have one south of Poughkeepsie. And this is a linked repeater system. And just as we were describing, access one and you're accessing them all. So that's technician class, reaching all through from Poughkeepsie all the way through Vermont and New Hampshire and into and a lot of them in the Adirondacks. Yeah.
Fire station.
And I could mention then a couple of networking groups. One is UNDR, the under group. That's Ulster Northern Duchess Radio. And they are centered around Poughkeepsie. And they use the GARA network for their, they have a net meeting, I can't remember which, a weekly meeting, and then they have another monthly meeting. And they are an active group who do a lot of radio events. They do field day, they do winter field day, they do fox hunts. Fox hunts is a game where you have a radio transmitter, low power, hidden somewhere. And the idea is to set out from someplace with a directional antenna and a radio that's set up for a few things that have to happen so that the radio isn't overwhelmed. Because what you're trying to do is use this directional antenna to find out where's the strongest signal coming from and go in that direction. And then, as you have to go around a building or a mountain or whatever, you keep redirecting yourself a game. But it's fun, it's interesting, and it's honing one's general radio skills. They do that. The field days are emergency practice days. Our club does the summer field day where we take 24-hour period. We get a couple of hours to set up. We set up emergency power, emergency antennas, and bring radios. And you operate for 24 hours and see how many contacts you can make mostly around the country or your area. A lot of fun. It's when I get my radio act together, is when I have an event like that where I'll take the next step in building an antenna or the solar system to run. When I have that kind of a challenge, as well as the camaraderie. So you get together with an intention to be able to do something in an emergency situation, and just I put my act together 1 degree further each time. Winter field day is the same thing, except that it's in the middle of winter. Usually much less well attended, but same kind of fun. So they do those kinds of activities as well as have meetings with different skill sharings. Yes.
So from Michelle.
Yeah.
McKinley, I believe there is a repeater in Rome for Rome Radio Club at Griffiths Air Force Base. They have 2 field days a year and monthly meetings.
Cool. Rome, New York?
Rome, New York.
Let me just see if it happens to be in here. Rome, 2 repeaters, 146.88 and 147.285. Yeah. Then there's another group, very interesting group called AMRON, which is A, capital A, small m, capital R, capital O, capital M. And it's the American Radio Redoubt Network. It's national, very much disruption response oriented, very well organized in many ways, but it's also so it's national. They run national nets. They run nets all over. They have literally coast to coast nets regularly. They have regional nets, and they have sort of neighborhood nets, a statewide nets. And anybody who wants to join can set up a net. That's how they spread. And I would very much like to see one get going in our area. They have very well developed protocols for security. Yeah, they're not encrypted because they're amateur radio, but they have good security for knowing that you're an AMRON member. They're not exclusive, but I'm very impressed by their capabilities. They put a lot of work into, because here's the thing, we get started, like take our GMRS group. Our intention is response capability to help one another, but if things are going down, knowing what's happening on your block isn't enough. You need even to where can I get gasoline? I can't get it on my block. I can't get it anywhere near where I live. And if the gas stations are dry, it's no good to fight your way over there. Who needs a midwife? Where's the midwife? Who can connect me with a midwife? Where is, we had an incident in Columbia County, one of our few emergency incidents some years ago, fire at a plant that processed PCBs. And there was a toxic plume of smoke coming from that. Well, it mattered a lot what direction the plume was going. That was important to be able to know where the plume was, where not to be, and where not to worry. As I said, I live beside the Hudson River. It's across the street down the bluff. There's a river. Big tankers coming up that. Yeah. There was a tanker went aground there a few years ago. Amtrak and freight trains run right up alongside below the bluff there. On the other side of the river, there's another set of train tracks. All those are vulnerable to derailments. And you can remember in, what was the name of that town where that big derailment? Palestine. Yes, East Palestine. Being able to share information is important, and that requires networks. And if there are a lot of kinds of disruptions where it would matter to know what's happening in the next state. And that's one of the strong points of AMRON is creating these networks so that you can contribute to it and also know where to go. But if you haven't decided to find out about it and learn how to connect to it, then it doesn't do any good. It being there. It's there, it's ready to help you out, it's ready to take your contributions, but only if you've learned about it and then practiced actually doing it. Critical, important thing to think about.
Question. The last 10, 15 minutes you talk about a lot about repeaters. Isn't the difference between ham and GMRS that ham doesn't really need repeaters, but it's, the waves bounce off the sky basically and doesn't need a line of sight?
Good question. And so this is where we will be. We're going to start off today, but then we'll go further with understanding the radio spectrum, which is the range of frequencies all of which have different characteristics. Yeah? And one of the things we're talking about now is what can you do with technician class radio? The technician's frequencies do not bounce off at all. Yeah. So they're line of sight and then repeaters. The 10 meter band is accessible. There's a range that does do some bouncing. In a 10 meter band, you do have a range of frequencies for phone operations that you can do the bouncing. So there is a spot, and it depends. Depends a lot on sunspot conditions whether that is usable in that way. But there's
clear in the internet manual. I'm starting to read now.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't specify what's what. You know.
So the next thing I'd like to do, just as the next step in radio, remember this is also about what are radios, how do you use them, this part that I had no clue of when I got my license, right? So I've got a series of radios here of different sorts that I want to show you and give some sense just for their physical reality and capabilities. This is kind of famous in ham radio world. It's called a Bofang UV5R. You can get one of these for $17. Thank you. You can get one of these for $17, up to $20, $30. Amazon right now, $16.95 or something like that, some shipping. 2 for $40, different things. This is a dual band transmit radio for the 2 meter and 77 meter bands, the 440 band. In addition to that, it has a receive capability on a whole lot of other bands, including FM radio, but also frequencies that are used by different public service groups, and NOAA weather as well. This $17 here is, let's see, there's so many different ones to remember which is the battery release. Here, I think. There it is. So, what is this? These small radios are called HTs. HT stands for handheld transceiver. So what this has got in it is it has a radio transmitter, it has a radio receiver, it has an antenna, and it has a power supply. An entire station is right here. They come with what is called a rubber ducky. And part of the reason for that silly name is that there's a certain silliness element. It's low performing, let's say. Absolutely reasonable to use in neighborhood situation. Yeah. But our club, there is a club centered in Kinderhook, but it's all over the Northeast, of horse and carriage people. And they have an annual event which is an obstacle course. So somebody is riding the carriage pulled by the horse, going through the woods on a trail, and has to go to different locations and then go through a gate and around some obstacles and come back out and then go on to the next obstacle and do a whole circuit and see how fast they get it. And they're timed at each one. Somebody is there making sure that they get all the direct places they're supposed to go. And one of the big problems for them is that there might be at least 30 people running this, and they have to do it only a couple at a time, and it takes a long time to run it. and they have to then gather all of those scoring information back at headquarters and then sit down and go and try to figure out, and 3 hours later they know who won. So they like radio. And they had our club come, and it was very successful one year, and then they tried it on their own. They went and rented some radios, and they just didn't do it. So I was involved with it one year, and some of our guys, I'm embarrassed to say, came with exactly this, because it was it was no more than 2 miles distance in woods, and probably the distance from radio to radio was less than that, and they were not able to reach that with this. This is one with an extended antenna. It came with a rubber ducky. This is an accessory antenna, and it's longer, and it has a loading coil as well here, which has to do with making it even reception-wise, even longer than it is. So this is an important step, and with this we were able to, we had a couple of people that had these, and they had to relay messages. They could hear somebody, they're out in the woods, they can hear somebody because they're nearby, and then they would radio it to me, which was receiving it all. So this is another handheld. This one is a TID, I think it's a T3 as I remember. Mike, you have a T8, right? Okay. So this right now, these would normally sell for about $45. Some people are using my own favorite video course, which is Gary Wise, W4EEY. This is what he recommends as a starter radio. And I wondered about it. I got one because I want to be able to work things out for people. If it's recommended people are going to get it, then I want to be able to try things out and help solve problems with it. There are some, one of the reasons the UV5R is so popular is that it's so cheap that you don't have to worry about losing it or dropping it. It's a great beginner. You don't have much of an investment either, and you can have a real radio experience. You can listen to a lot. It's got those 2 bands for transmit. It's programmable. We'll talk about that. Repeaters, you program a radio typically so that it's set up that it goes to the frequency you want, and it has the tones in it that you want to be able to open up the repeater, the PL tones. We'll be talking about that later, but you save those into memories. It happens that it's there's some real trickiness to doing that on the UV5R. I've learned how to program them, but keeping them in there, there's some real fussiness to it. Some of the advantages to the T3 is that one is that it's Bluetooth USB-C rechargeable. So any USB-C charger or battery pack will power this, even though those packs are at 5 volts and this needs 7.5. They've got a device in there, a buck booster, to pull it up to the voltage they need to charge the battery that's in it. It's built into it. It's also, with that USB-C, one of the nice things, when you're just using, like what I was doing here, where I was just using the 3 repeaters that our club has, it's no big deal to hand program those into the radio. But if you want to set up to be able to receive the various repeaters in your area that you can reach in your, like I would be putting in No Bark, our ham club, there's several private repeaters in the area. When you start putting in all of those, it gets laborious. It's definitely, and they have memories. They have memory banks, so you can save that information into the memory. There's computer programs to do that, to do the programming. You type it into the program and it puts it all at once into the radio. They take a special cable. This radio has its own software available, and you can you can exchange the information from your computer to this over USB. That's another really good feature. The USB charging is really handy. These typically, I didn't bring one, but they have a charging cradle. That's how you charge them. You set it in the charging cradle, plug that in. The wall wart has the right voltage for the cradle. The cradle has the right voltage for the radio, and it connects with these connectors in the back of the radio, so it charges the radio. So TD3. This one is normally about $45. Right now, the manufacturer has it on sale for $30. TID radio. This is my favorite. This is a Yaesu FT60. That's what it says on here. It's an R, which means that it's set up for North America. An E would be set up for Europe. There's different frequency ranges that are allowable in Europe than here, not by a lot. Same band, but the bracketing is different. This is a rugged radio. Weighs twice as much as those. I've got the extended antenna on it. Same complete station, removable battery. Interesting. That's really surprising. Yeah. So I wanted to mention then. But another handheld. This one's $160. Rugged, good for programming from the keyboard. Very good characteristics as a radio. It's several steps up from these. In terms of the quality of the radio itself. This is a mobile radio, a tri-band radio, 25 watts. These are all the handhelds are 5 watts nominal. I think Mike's is the T8 a 8 watt, and there is an 8 watt UV5R some T or something like that. Also, it's 8 watts. So this is made to no power supply. Here's the power connector. All radios except handhelds are modern, are designed for nominal 12-volt operation as from a car battery. They're actually set up for 13.8 volts. They can operate from about 14.5 down to about 12. So this is the antenna connector. It also needs a remote antenna. Here is one mag mount remote antenna with coaxial cable and a connector that connects to the back of that radio. So this one is made to stick on the top of your car. Most cars it will stick to. Some cars it won't these days because they have fiberglass or aluminum. It has it's a dual band antenna, and getting it being a larger antenna, able to intercept more radio energy, and then being higher than a handheld because on top of the car, and makes the difference in its ability to receive. So this is not a complete station. This is the transceiver. Yeah. The other thing I didn't mention in this, but should have, there are many other aspects to this, but the obvious one is it's got a microphone and a speaker. Yeah. This one has a built-in speaker, but not, and typically this one as a mobile actually has all of the controls on the microphone. You see all those buttons up there. for the different frequencies, but also to access the menu if you need to make changes in how it's operating. And then up and down has to do with moving through the menu, can also do with the frequency. So it gets operated by this, which is a speaker microphone. Not just a microphone, this is a speaker microphone.
What brand is that one?
This is B-Tech. It's actually, Baofeng is B-A-O-F-E-N-G. That's this one. This is another company associated. The internet address is Baofeng Tech. Short is B-Tech, but it happens to be the manufacturing for these is done in the United States, and repairs is done in the United States. So this one is $125. It's a 2-band, 20-watt mobile radio. So it's got 4 times the power and is designed to be used with external antennas up on the roof. These can be used in the house. A Magman antenna can be a good first antenna to have because you can put it on a cookie sheet or a steel file cabinet. The magnet, the purpose of the magnet itself is to grip the piece of metal that it's on. But the reason for the metal is what's called the ground plane. It's the other half of the antenna, which we'll learn more about later. This is a rooftop antenna. This one happens to be a single band GMRS, but it's the same size as a 77 centimeter, because that's, so inside this is the ground plane for this antenna, which is 1/2 of the antenna. We'll learn more about that. Why is this short and this so long? This is a 1/4 wavelength, we'll learn about that, on that 70 centimeter band. So all this needs to operate is a vertical part that's this long. That would be a 70, and we have made these during field day as sort of an activity to do, to make an antenna, which is actually a wire vertical this long with a loop to hang it from, and 3 or 4 radials of this kind of length. What's in here, though, if you take this, and I didn't think to bring the right size Allen wrench. I could get one from the car, but I'm not going to. Inside this are a whole series. Well, usually, this is a 1/4 wave. A 5/8 wave is one of the best wavelengths for this kind of antenna. And what they will typically have in here is 3 5/8 wavelength antennas with a little coil in between so that they don't mess with each other, so that this one doesn't cancel out this one. It's a phase delay so that they're in phase, so that they are all adding to one another. And the whole thing adds up. We've got 3 antennas, so we got a lot of reception area here for the energy that comes in. But this is the ground plane aspect. That's that need for this, for the second side is why the mag mount needs to be on a cookie sheet or some metal or a file cabinet, for instance. Okay. Next up is another mobile, my sweetheart. This is a Yaesu FT891. Again, a very popular radio. There is a radio sport that's become very popular in ham radio called POTA. P-O-T-A stands for Parks on the Air. And the idea of that one is that you go portable to various state parks, national forests, state forests, and you operate there. You've got a battery. I didn't happen to bring one to power. This is a 12-volt battery. And you set up and you make radio calls. Nice thing about POTA happens to be that there is an app for POTA, and when you are going to what they call activate a park, each park has a alphanumerical designation, you're going to activate that park. If you get 10 contacts at that park, you get credit for having activated that park. It's a sport. And you can register on the POTA app and say, at this day, at this time, I'm going to be at this park and I will be on this frequency. One of the bizarre things about ham radio is that when you use your cell phone, right? How many, I think there's one person, 2 people in this room who I can reach by cell phone. Can't reach the rest of you. Why?
We don't have a contact info.
I don't have the telephone number. There are no telephone numbers on ham radio. Yeah? You have to find somebody. You just dial along until you find somebody talking. And so, that can be tough. And one of the nice things about POTA is you can go look at the app and you've got an appointment. And so it's just, it's more practice. You still have to make the contact. There's all kinds of things. It's not just because you know where somebody's going to be at what time doesn't mean you can reach them. Depends on your antenna, your strength, atmospheric conditions. There's lots of things still that leave it still sporting. SOTA is summits on the air. Then you go climb a mountain with your radio and do the same thing. So this is a 100-watt transceiver, very popular in general. It's designed for mobile, but it's POTA is almost always you're driving there. SOTA, you're backpacking. Yeah, so SOTA is more likely to use a lighter radio with a lighter battery than this one. But for POTA, this is one of the favorites. It's one of the favorites in general. This is an HF plus 6 meters radio. So we'll go into band plans and what that means. But this is the general, when we generally think of ham radio, most of what's thought of about, besides the repeaters part, is in the HF spectrum. This has that. So it's 160 meters up to 10 meters and up to 6 meters. 10 meters and 6 meters are both in the technician privileges. So technicians can work voice in 10 meters and 6 meters. Many of the HF transceivers don't have 6 meters. Now, generally all go one, sometimes it will be 80 to 10 meters. Full spectrum is 160 to 10 meters. The 6 meters isn't so common. This one happens to have it. It's very helpful because 6 meters is also good for local communications. One of the unusual things about this for going mobile is that it can be taken apart and you can put a long cable on this. So this is all you need to operate the radio. It's called the radio head. It's got all the operations. And then you use a long cable to a speaker or to a headset to work this mobile. And this one is a microphone. It uses a speaker in the radio itself. And again, you would need either a battery. So you need either like your car battery. If you use your car battery, you would have to have wiring that goes direct from your battery into the cab to connect to the radio. It draws too much power to use from a cigarette lighter connection. So this is a 12-volt power supply for that radio, or the other one, it's a 25 amp power supply, plugs in to household current, has the nominal 12 volts out. This is a type that is sometimes called a shack in a box. So a shack is a colloquial name for a ham radio station. And what's unusual about this one, and why it's the type called the Shack in the Box, in the back here where we have the antenna connection, this one has another connection over here. This one is for HF antenna, and this is for VHF and UHF, which is the typical repeater frequency. So this one not only has the full HF band and 6 meters, it also has a 2 meter band and a 440 band. And what those mean we'll be talking about after the break. This one, this is about $650, and this one is about $1,300. I have some suggestions for starter HF radios for later. Mention just again quickly a bit about what is this in the biggest sense, it's a transceiver, transmitter receiver, but what else is involved in it? First off, it has an on-off volume control. I was surprised not to be getting one aspect from this that I expected. Let's see if we get it on the other one. It's not uncommon for these little ones to have flashlights as well.
Channel mode.
Okay, so that was what you heard there is the sound of the radio simply receiving what is in the air. All kinds of noise and static. All the radios are receiving that. They have to pick out from that what is intelligible. And there is, this one in particular has the button that I pushed is called a monitor button, and what it does is it shuts off the part of the radio that blanks out that static. So you don't have to listen to all that static until somebody comes on with something meaningful to say. It blanks it out, and that's called squelch. And on this one, the squelch is adjustable. I actually loaned this to a musician who was doing a show where he wanted the sound of rain. And he was trying to find an AM radio, and he couldn't find one. This is an AM, but what he was looking for was that non-squelch, noisy sound, and he was able to control it with this dial on this one. You have to go inside the radio on the others in order to find the squelch setting. What the squelch is about is that it simply is listening, and the signal it's like a dimmer on a light switch. You have it dim, you've not got much light. You get it, turn it up and up and up, you got more and more light. What the radio receives, the dim part is the noise. A signal is much stronger. Yeah? What it's receiving, in addition to all the noise, it's receiving a transmission. So the transmission is on top of all that noise, and what it does, the squelch just goes up to that level. You set it to where it cuts off all that sound, and you want it to be just above that so that even a signal that's just a little bit stronger than the squelch you can still hear. If you set it too high, you'll be missing all of the faint signals, and you'll find in ham radio, when we get away from these, the weak signals is a lot of what you actually find yourself listening for. They're not we're spoiled by, the other thing about cell phones is we're spoiled by their clarity and ease of use. So that's the squelch is part of the system. It has a button on here that says VFO MR. VFO is variable frequency oscillator. It's about tuning the radio. When it's on variable frequency, you dial the frequency, either with the buttons here that go up the numbers or by typing in the frequency that you want. It's variable. The other one, MR, is memory recall, sometimes called channel, and that's the part where when you've gone to all the trouble of setting up for a particular frequency of a repeater, putting in the PL tone for the transmit, the PL tone for the receive, and there's another part of it is that there is an offset on repeaters. They don't transmit and receive on the same frequency. Again, we'll just touch on this all now. Don't worry about that. We'll be coming back to it where we can make more sense of it. But that's another thing that has to be programmed in. You've done all of that trouble. You can save it to memory. And then you just go, you save it to a particular numbered memory. Memory 16. You want memory 16? You just dial to, you hit on the MR, you dial up to 16 and you've got all of that information there. The radio is set for that and you just go ahead and operate.
A question here, generally speaking, where do the antennas get mounted? Various antennas.
So, as I mentioned, the mag mounts go on the top of your car or on a cookie sheet. They can be inside. That stick antenna, sort of generic name for it, is typically mounted on a roof. I have mine on the house. I've got one where I've simply got a pipe fitting on the eave of the roof with an elbow and a piece of pipe coming up, and it's mounted there. And I've got coax cable running into the house. At my ham shack, I've got a 10-foot mast on top of a second-story building that's used for my HF antenna as well, but on top of that, I've got a tri-band stick like that. So it's these are sort of limited to the types of that you can use in the VHF, UHF technician frequencies. But there are in HF, there are other kinds of antennas that might be strung between trees, might go on a tower, might throw a line up into a tree and pull an antenna up into it, or between two trees. Lots of possibilities there. But these typically is nice when you can put a stick like that. This has a lot of what we'll learn more about. It's called gain. It picks up a lot more signal than the little ones. And so it's very helpful just as a thing, so much more than even these extended antennas or even than these. You can use that in your house. Especially these UHF, VHF, they're pretty good about picked up in the house. You can put it in an attic if you don't have a metal roof like I do. I got into the attic at this house and I found a TV antenna up in the attic. Somebody had gone to a lot of trouble because it had to be taken apart and reassembled up there. There's a metal roof. Metal is called shielding. Radios don't go through metal. Yeah, but they can be in a closet. They can be a corner of a room. You stood up in the corner of a room. So controls. This one has an AB switch. It's very common in the handhelds to be able to operate on two different bands. You can operate on two different frequencies. Can even be bands though. So this is a 2 meter and 70 centimeter radio, around 146 megahertz and around 445 megahertz, the two bands. You can work either of those. You can also work one of them and listen on the other. And you can be set up for 2 different repeaters and choose which of those you listen or talk to with the A-B. You set both of them up, one is A, one is B, and then this switches between the 2. Then there's a band button that switches between the 2 meter and the 440, 70 centimeter band. There will also be that I told you about that horse and carriage event. I got out there with my favorite radio here, and we had to use a different it was set up for the repeater. But we didn't want to use a repeater frequency because then you tie it up and it's supposed to be left open for people to use. This is just our personal event, so we want a different frequency. I couldn't change the frequency because at the time I didn't know that one of the buttons on these things is a keyboard lock. Pressing it the second time unlocks it. Usually they're set up so most of the buttons on these things will have 2 different uses. One is a short press, one's a long press. The lock you don't want to happen accidentally if you can help it, so it requires a long press. But it's good to know about the lock feature and the unlock feature. One of the very important ones is scan. This is a wonderful thing. What scanning does is, you actually often have on a car radio, you'll have this function, seek. What it does is it scans until it comes to a station, and then it stops there. And there's different ways you can set it up. You can set it up so it actually simply stops, and then you go ahead and transmit on that, or you can have it so that it stops, tells you where it's at, and then if you don't transmit, it moves on to the next one so that you can let it, they're out of many hundreds of frequencies, there might be a couple of repeaters that you have frequencies you actually want, but there's only one of them that you actually want at this moment. So you let it scan till it hits the one, let it go, you see that's not the one, let it go on to the next one, and then you get it. So the scan function. On the side will be a rubber cover that opens up, and you can use an external microphone like one of these that plugs into it. You can also, that's where you would program it. You'd plug a cable in there in order to program it. Yeah, so these are the basic features of any of the radios. There'll be in the others, especially in the big one, there will be various other functions that help you filter out noise and things like that. Are there any questions on radios and antennas at this stage? This is just the bare introduction. Yeah.
Christian, will you be providing any links to the radios that you're discussing here? Because I kind of went through it fast, the model numbers and things that you highlighted. Or if you can provide it to me, I can actually put it in the chat.
Sure, I'll do that.
Okay, great.
So I think it'd be a good time for a break. We have, as I said, the restroom and water fountains are all the way down, straight down here. We've got coffee, cider, water, muffins, and brownies. Could we get the PowerPoint that we had up? Because we've, just in talking about any of this, I keep talking about bands and frequencies. There are 2 different parts to that, and we'll start here, and then I'll do something to help explain understand much more about wavelength and frequency, what waves are like, how to think about those. So what we've got right here is take one, pass it. So this is the technician class band plan. So there are two aspects to where ham operators are allowed to work in the radio frequency spectrum, which we'll talk further about later. Right now, what we've got here is a listing here of, this is the HF band, which there isn't a lot of room for technician operations. There is some. This is the, over here is the band designation. We talk about the 80-meter band. That has to do with the wavelength. We'll hear more about what that means. And then down here, it tells you what frequency is actually the frequency range for this band, 3.5 to 4.0 megahertz. And there are a few of these math prefixes like mega and kilo that you'll need to get familiar with and how to move between them. But there are only a few that are actually used. The test question will ask you typically to translate something into pico something. You never see pico in radio work. I see it occasionally in electronics. There's a thing about testing with this stuff. People say, I had to suffer through it, so you too get to do. You should suffer like I had to suffer. So they've got pico in there.
That's some fun.
But in general, it's useful. There are places where, so the next one, 40-meter band, 15-meter, 10-meter band. This is HF, where there isn't a lot of ham privileges, but there are technician privileges, but there are some. And the first thing to see is up, as I mentioned, in a 10-meter band, this set of frequencies, you're allowed to use digital, which we'll hear more about later, and CW. CW is Morse code. How do you get from CW to Morse code? What it is it actually stands for continuous wave. And that means that, you use dit, dot, 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 dit, SOS thing that we all learn about. That's being the key. There's a key that turns the transceiver, the transmitter, actually on to transmit. When you press the key down, it transmits. Let go, it doesn't. Space. Press it down a short one, it's called a dit. Press down long time, it's a da. Space in between. Dit, da, that kind of thing. The transmission from the transmitter is a continuous wave. It's continuous when it's transmitting. It goes on and it's just a straight burst of energy at that particular frequency. What you can't, if you actually tune to that exact frequency, you wouldn't hear anything. What you do is you tune slightly above it, and then you hear that difference. And we'll hear more about that later. But in any case, you can use CW in here and data digital. So there's some neat, easy to use, not so easy to set up your equipment for. I haven't managed it yet. I will. And then this section, you can also do code. So CW is usually referred to as code, Morse code, or as CW. Or SSB. SSB is single sideband, which is an aspect, we'll learn more about this, is of the modulation, the way the radio transmission has got voice in it. But single sideband is simply a more efficient way to do that. It's the most commonly used voice at this time. But these, I didn't mention this, these radios are all FM only. All of these handhelds will be FM only, which is like FM radio in your car, which means low noise. These other radios are multi-mode. They have FM, they have single sideband, and AM. Still, we'll hear more about that. But the point is here, the single sideband is voice. Right? You can operate on these other 3 bands as well. There are 4 HF bands that a technician can operate on, but only with Morse code. Now, there's one person in the group who learned Morse code some years ago, and we talked about it, and she's going to re-up on her Morse code because she enjoyed it. I knew one fella who was in our club. He was a postmaster in Germantown. He lived in Hudson. So he had this commute. And he had a Morse code key that he strapped to his leg, to his thigh, and he would operate while he's on his commute. Morse code, operating the key. He told me that it's easy to learn if you're at all musical. I'm not. And the Long Island CW Club is famous for being very good at teaching people Morse code. It's a very good thing to learn. I envy people who can do it. One of the reasons being is simply that we haven't yet had the experience of listening to HF radio, but it's noisy. That's the nature of radio. There's all kinds of atmospheric noise. You punch through it, so to speak, with voice, but you very often are listening to a weak voice in the midst of a lot of noise. And the more you're able to do that, the more you're able to operate successfully and usefully on radio. When I got my license 9 years ago was one of the worst possible times to be a ham, because there's this thing we'll hear more about, the sunspot cycles really affect radio transmission when it's bouncing off the ionosphere, which is what most HF does. And we call the bands are dead. It was very hard to hear anything but noise. CW, all you're picking out is the tone. It's really easy to distinguish a short and long tone instead of trying to make meaningful listening out of a voice in the midst of this noise. So it's a very, and look at the privileges you've got. You got a lot of privileges with CW. And in the 10-meter band, you've got single sideband. And 10-meter single sideband, when the conditions are good, it can be good locally, but it can also be very long distance when the various things that affect the ionosphere sunspot cycles are. So let's go to the next slide.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
I guess, so I'm like a complete radio neophyte.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to like translate these things into like, I'm kind of, I don't know, just interpreting them.
Yeah.
Perhaps. So is this basically saying that like, you're a technician, you're kind of like the lowest level allowances
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
And so you can get on there, but you basically have access to the like smallest number of options
Yep.
for getting a good signal. Is that pretty much what this translates to?
Well, it's options period, and that includes good signal.
Okay, so types of behavior and also options for a good signal.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's not, I mean, the reason I mentioned it, I don't think that it's simply more radio access rather than better signals.
Okay.
Because the VHF, the general doesn't have any more access on the VH bands than you do. All the repeater work is that you've got as much privilege as an extra class license on the VHF, where you may get very good signals. There are different, and you know, I'm jumping the gun to present this now, so there will be many more of these considerations later. It's just that I felt that since I'm using this language, I could show you the band plan, and it also is a little bit of a picture of what you are allowed to do as a technician, which is a lot.
Okay.
It,
Compared to mental health,
Oh, okay.
every band is
So let's move to the next. I don't know why that. Just keep going until you get to the. That's it. Okay, so this is a technician class band plan. I could mention, I was going to say, band plan. The first thing that happens is on a band of frequencies, yeah, that's the space range of frequencies where you can work. It's like a space, but the space is divided up. And the division is actually informal. It's been formally suggested. And the reason for it is to leave spaces for particular kinds of radio. So on the band plan, you have privileges. Well, actually, take that back. I think I'm misstating that because we're coming to, there is a later subsection. This part here of the band plan is formal and legal. Yeah, you are only allowed to operate in this mode in this range of frequencies with a technician license. There's a further division for later on where within this there will be divisions which are informal, and it's suggested that you concentrate digital, say, on one section over here, so that you leave it open for the voice work because they don't, they interfere with one another in terms of being able to make sense of, because digital just comes across as like when you're dialing a phone, when you used to be able to hear the phone tones, or if anybody can go back to the dial-up modems for the internet, hearing that, that's digital. Okay, so 3 bands in VHF. VHF is the range from 30 to 300 megahertz. They're the 6 meter band, 50 megahertz is the bottom, 2 meter band, 144, 1.25 is starts at 219. This stretch, all of these areas, you have voice and FM. I'm going to mention those particularly because that's mostly what you want to do. Single sideband is voice. It's the more efficient voice. You get more range out of a given power with single sideband than with AM or FM. You can also operate television, slow scan TV as a technician. You can operate, send television pictures. Also CW and digital. Then there is a place where you're only allowed to work in code, CW, and then there's a little section here that's only about like where you use to link repeaters. You can't operate this. So this is just a stretch here of 3 regions in the VHF. This is like the repeater. Our repeater is 147.210, and in fact, I had one of these just happened to be laying here turned on and happened to be on that frequency. And I actually heard the station announcement. There's an hourly announcement from that repeater that I heard, received it here inside the building. So that is 147.210. This is the our 220 repeater would be this section. So there's sections that as a lot of radio space open to technician class. And the next one, this one here, UHF, next slide. So in the UHF, which is from 300 megahertz up to 3,000 megahertz, but we generally, there are the ones, higher ones are really microwave, and there are people who love working microwave in ham radio. 70 centimeter is the common one. This is the only one that most repeaters, this is the highest one that the repeater would be working, and this is the range that you have access to as a technician. You also have for these higher ranges, you want to have fun. There are people, this is up to 12, so your range here is 1,240 megahertz up to 1,300 megahertz. This range right here is actually the Meshtastic, right at the bottom end of this one. Because you can actually operate the Meshtastic as a ham. There's a section of it you have to turn off the encryption, but you can turn up the power right at that end. So that's the band plan. That's the band plan concept. You could turn that off now.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
So it seems like the capabilities with the various UHF signals are similar. You know, you have AM,
Yes.
FM,
Yeah.
FM. So is it just a matter of the different type of antennas then that you would need that associates with, say, with 70 centimeters and 33 centimeters and 23 centimeters?
You need a different transceiver. You need a transceiver that covers that range. Like these three are dual band radios. So they cover the 2 meter band in the VHF. They don't cover the 1.25 meter band back in the VHF. It's still in VHF, but they don't have the capability to receive it.
Okay.
This one will receive the 220 and transmit on the 220, and so will this one. This is a tri-band radio here.
So you need the correct transceiver. What about antennas? You need to have.
Also.
Okay, so you need both. So it's a combination of both. Okay.
And there are multi-band antennas.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
It's a combination. And we'll understand that much more when we do propagation. Now, we're going to take the next step, and this is a big step. We're going to take it little steps at a time. But this can be really interesting, and this is about radio propagation, radio waves, and it's the fundamentals of everything having to do with radio. And it usually really gets second shrift. A lot of misunderstanding just because people don't understand it. They haven't needed to, and then there will be various things going on with the station where they won't have a clue what's going on because they don't have this basic understanding. Besides, it just feels good to have that basic understanding. So we're going to start off very slowly. This is not part of the test. Some of the concepts will be a part of the test. Wavelength, frequency, it's an important part. We'll move to modulation. But the basic things I'm going to show here aren't part of the test. They're for your own understanding. And we're going to start off with a demonstration. And I will I'll introduce it, and then you best to actually come up and stand behind this table in a moment in order to see this. And I need to introduce it in the sense that what I'm going to show you is going to be physically subtle, but obviously real. And the reason I have to go through that is we are so inundated with digital graphics where everything is easily exaggerated. And so we're so used to things being made dramatic that the simple fact that something happens by itself, you say, well, what's the big deal? It's hardly moving. But it's moving. And why is it moving? And is there a relationship between its movement and the other movement that we're going to see? And this is actually the basis of everything having to do with radio. And everything, in fact, having to do with the internet, because you don't have any internet without this behind it. Everything to do with electrical generation, everything having to do with electrical motors is going to be right here. Yeah. So first, I'll just mention an aspect of this. It's important about part of what we'll be talking about. What I've got up here is a coil of copper wire, insulated copper wire, and a magnet, horseshoe magnet, connected. Coil of copper wire, a magnet. An important part of this is that the length of the suspension is the same on both of them. Yeah? And people who know music have some sense of the importance of that. But this comes from a discovery, the first discovery in physics by the first modern scientist, Galileo Galilei. And he was, first off, this was a time in the Renaissance when the only way you could go to school would be as a priest or as a doctor. There was no higher education for anything else. He was a musician, but he went to school as a doctor. He already knew music. His father was a composer and musician. But one of the things that Galileo was somebody who wanted to know stuff, and he didn't want to be told what to think. And at the time, the way they did medicine and education was exactly to tell people what to think. And the problem, especially at this time, was that the professors really didn't know what they were talking about. It had been a kind of, there's fascinating stuff with the history of consciousness, but it used to be that people had kind of an intuitive sense of the human body, for instance, and that got lost more and more. And the professors didn't know very much, but they had their ideas, and you're supposed to think the way they think or you don't graduate. So they would the students would be up in the theater at the school looking down at this place where the professor with the corpse was explaining anatomy, and the local butcher would be doing the dissecting, and he'd cut something out of the body and hold it up, and the professor would tell people what this is and what its role was in the organism and all that. And Galileo's going up there and he says, I just don't know. You know, I don't get a good feeling from this guy to begin with, but there's no way for me to check it out. And I want to find something where I can check it out for myself. So that's his a mood, and it happened that one day he was at church. You know, Catholicism was big at the time, and he was in church, and they had candelabras, and they had open air, and wind would move through, and the candelabras would swing. And depending, a strong breeze, and you get a long swing. Yeah. So this candelabra here from the ceiling. Long swing, and there you get the pendulum working. Well, but what he noticed was something really odd. It's also odd that he noticed. He's in church. He's not supposed to be thinking this way. He's supposed to go, oh. Anyway, here it is, and there was a light breeze, and it got to swinging. Now, it's something that's not easy to spot. He was timing things with his pulse. He had to be very calm, even though he was so interested in this. What he discovered was the time it took to get from here to here was exactly the same, no matter how far the swing was. The only thing that determined how long this took was how long the string was. This is very quick. In comparison, you get even shorter. Quick, 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 quick. So any time that two pendulums have the same length, they have what's called the same period. And so these two pendulums have the same period. Now again, I have to caution that what we're going to do is I am going to set one of the coils in motion. There's no mechanical connection between the two. Yeah? And what I want you to do is notice this one. And remember that what we're looking for is something happening, not a lot happening. I'm going to do bigger coils, fancy. If I had a tremendously strong magnet here, we'd have more effect. What we're looking for is the fact and the relationship between the two movements. And then we want to think about, wait a minute, how the heck? So if you can just get up maybe a little closer where you can see better, maybe it's fine back there. But just, and be so everybody can see. And then we're going to, I'm going to try and chart this out so we can stop to think about it a little more. You see the setup, coil, wires, connecting wires, coil, magnet. Notice anything about the rhythm? What can you say about the rhythm? So one is, but that isn't the rhythm. How are the timings on the motion related?
Period's the same.
The period's exactly the same. The period's exactly the same. So what's going on here? There's nothing mechanical linking the two. But this was in the early 19th century, late 18th century. When it was first noticed by a Danish scientist, Hans Christian Ørsted, discovered that when he had a compass needle and he had a wire running alongside the compass needle and he connected it to batteries, the needle moved. And I tried to bring, and I just didn't manage to get it set up this morning to actually show you that. But think of it, this is a copper wire which is not magnetic. You know, the magnet won't stick to it. It does not affect the compass, right? Put a piece of steel near the compass will swing. Put a magnet near it, it'll swing one way or the other. Copper, no effect. Electricity, electrified wire, the compass moves. Why does the compass move? There's only one reason.
Creating magnetism.
Yes. The wire became, in some way, and this very odd discovery, and another one that would be neat to show you, but this really is the same effect. One of the odd, Ørsted had tried for quite a while to get this, and he found no effect. And why? Well, if you have a needle that you want to indicate something, the way that it's going to show the most reveal something happening is if we're talking about normally pushes, right? So I've got a needle here. If I push it this way, it's very sensitive because it's a lever. It's sensitive here. If I've got it this way and I push on it, nothing happens, right? So figuring that he's got electricity and it must be going from here to here on the wire, that's the thinking at the time, then I don't want to put it this way, I want to put it this way, right? So it's sensitive to it. It's going this way, so I got the needle very sensitive, right? So he kept setting that up. And more sensitive, longer compass, a better bearing on, nothing would happen. One day, as so often happens in science, accidentally, the compass needle happened to be going this way, and it went whoosh, whoosh. So there's something very strange about this magnetism, and what's found is that when one of the demonstrations I do is with a vertical wire and a ring of compasses around the wire. And you look at how they are deflected when this gets magnetic. And what happens is that they are all deflected to form a circle around it. So the magnetism is actually circular, and we'll talk further about this, it fills this space. Now this is the odd thing. Look at these, this isn't touching the magnet. It's in space. So Ørsted discovered that electricity can create magnetism, a magnetic effect. Michael Faraday, considered the greatest experimental physicist that ever lived, is the one who discovered everything about electromagnetism. He felt that if magnetism was related to electricity in the sense of the electricity bringing about the magnetism, it must be that the reciprocal would be true. Magnetism would bring about electricity. And he worked for years trying different experiments, and he came to discover exactly that a changing magnetic field will create an electrical condition. Changing. So nothing's happening here because there's no change in the field. Field is a field is a region, an area in space with some particular properties. So I live driving home. I usually go out Route 9 and then down to my 9J, down to my road down to the Hudson River. And as I drive down that road, if I'm driving down right now, there are 26A, Route 26A, there are a bunch of flat areas alongside the road that are brown. Yeah? There's a certain period where some of them get dark brown. In a couple of months, they'll start to get a little bit green. And then in a couple more months, the green will be getting big. And in a couple more months, it'll be as high as the elephant's eye, and they'll come in and harvest the corn. And what's that called? It's called a cornfield. And why is it a cornfield? Because it has the ability to bring about corn. So it has, when it's simply there, it's still in the wintertime, it's still a cornfield. I don't know it. I can't see it's a cornfield, but it has a potential for corn. So a field is a region, an area that has a potential for something to happen, something particular. So we learned about a magnetic field. Those compasses were moved despite not touching the wire. The area around it is magnetic. These magnets have fields around them. This coil is in that field, but nothing is happening because there's no change. When we change it, this is telling us that something's happening. And in fact, it's electrical. This is creating the electricity or electrical condition. It's connected here and over here. This is electrical. What happens when a wire becomes electrified? It's magnetic. And this magnet here is reacting to this magnetic field here. If you bring a magnet near a compass, it will move the compass. And they know that it's a magnetic response because if you turn it around, you'll get a very different response. You bring it in one way, and the needle goes like this. That could be a piece of steel. Turn the magnet around, and the needle goes like this. It's repelled. Then you know that this is the other pole of the magnet, and in fact, this is responding to it. This movement is electromagnetism. And that's the key to the modern world. Electromagnetism. And just to illustrate, so this is an this is a generator, and this is a motor. This is the microphone, and this is the loudspeaker. This is the transmitter. This is the receiver. This is the exact principle of the telegraph. There's no more to it with the telegraph, except some things to make it more apparent, but there's no difference in the principles. With radio, this is an analogy that will be tremendously helpful when we start to unpack these different relationships of time and motion and power.
Christian,
yeah.
can I just start this again?
Sure.
Some folks are having difficulty seeing this, so I'm using a different camera now.
Good, thank you. Okay, that's something this is what I was concerned about. Thanks for catching that. We need to make sure that, so you folks out there, we're working on trying to make this more apparent for you. It's a lot easier on us up here who can, really focus on one and the other. And I would just say once again that the key here is the fact of the movement and the relationship of the two, that they are in sync. That this is the one that I set in, I do something to this, otherwise nothing happens. So it's actually my work that is doing all of this. And that's a really important part that people generally are not clueless about electricity. Nothing happens without somewhere there's work being done. If it's a battery, the work being done is that inside the battery something is getting eaten up. That's the work that's happening in a battery. In a generator, it's this literal physical movement. And notice that this gets more and more. And we'll have to that's a really important element of it that we'll be able to talk about further. I'm wondering on the time today of just which part of this to take up. I think probably we should chart this one and leave the rest for next week. We have to talk about something called graphing, and what I want to do with this is, well, first let me finish off one part of this. I want to actually, and I haven't tried this yet here. I want to try actually applying a battery to this, some serious electricity, to see what happens, remembering this concept of electromagnetism and such what.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So this is electromagnetism. What it's saying is, when I electrify this, it's interacting with a magnet. Why? Because it's magnetic. So this is remember, Ørsted had a wire going beside a magnet, and he saw the interaction. What we've done here, and the magnetic force is around the wire. So this is a long wire. It's just coiled up. So it's concentrating, it's adding that magnetism. And so all I'm doing with this, applying electricity to it, is giving it more voltage, more power, something we'll talk about when we go into electricity next week. But you can see the strength of the effect. And it just amplifies, it's a confirmation of what we're talking about, but a little bit more visible. What it doesn't show, it shows the motor. doesn't show the generator. That's what's so beautiful about. You know, I did a workshop in Pennsylvania a couple of years ago on this, and when I did this one fella, first time I saw it, I knew how important it was to me. But he said, you know, I knew that it was going to move. Because I know enough about electromagnetism, I knew it was going to move. I was blown away to see it increasing, this one increasing and in step. That's the beauty of it. And that's everything to do with understanding radio, is that we'll come to a little later. Now, if we want to stop now and take another step in thinking about this and being able to relate it to radio, we're going to start off considering the motion of this. What Faraday discovered is the law of electromagnetism, is that the amount of electricity, electrical condition, voltage, current, is proportional to the rate of change. If this moves faster, there's more power. The faster this moves through the magnet, it takes me more work to do this. I get tired faster doing this than if I'm doing this. Yeah? More work for me to move this fast. More work brings about more of the electrical condition. So having that in mind, we try to think about what's going on here and picture it. And what I'm going to do is that boy, you know, I tried so hard to get large, bold, dry erase markers. I was online, I was on Amazon, I was on eBay, and I would, after a lot of searching, I finally put in a search, dry erase bold marker, you know, all these hits. And I'm looking, there's fine, there's extra fine. Oh, finally, there's a bold. I order it. It comes, I look at the package, nice, big, bold, easy for you folks to see. Permanent marker.
Very bold.
So I'm trying sideways with these. So in any case, if I'm careful, it should be okay. This is a neutral point on here. And think about the movement of this. There are two directions of movement. Electricity is always polar. Poles is like the poles of the earth. Poles, when a situation is polarized, it's something about opposition. You got North Pole, South Pole. It's all about opposites. So we have one electrical condition when we're moving in this direction, and another one when we move this way. And we can name them whatever we want. When it's usually plus and minus, right? And there was a convention. Benjamin Franklin was the first one to consider the fluid model of electricity, and he decided that it would, on a battery, one pole, it would flow down to the other one. So this was positive and this was negative, and the picture was of this flowing. And when they learned more about the chemistry and the physics, it was discovered that he was asked backwards. But it stuck because it's tradition. It doesn't really help much to consider that particular model, but the point is simply that plus and minus is a convention. It doesn't matter which is which. You need two. The battery will always be marked. This is the minus, this is the plus. The point simply being that we have, we can consider positive electricity and negative electricity. When the coil is moving in one direction, it starts off, this is 0. The coil starts off still. It's not moving at the height. There's another. When, if we consider the whole cycle, it's like the cycle of the seasons. The cycle is from here, back, starting here, going up to here, and back to here. That would be one cycle. I could start here, up, back to here. One cycle. If we consider the cycle, then it's starting off at 0. Now, as I let it go, and maybe it's easier to see it with more length, yeah, 0. Faster and faster and faster. And then slower and slower and slower, and then 0. Yeah, so we've got this cycle, 0, fastest, 0. Now, with a graph, what I'm doing is, in effect, I'm walking along in time, because this happens in time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to represent the voltage, which is the same as the speed. They're proportional, I mean. In other words, the faster it moves, the higher the voltage. It moves fastest at the bottom of this here. Anybody been on a swing set? My daughter loved swings. We had, when she was a toddler, we had an enormous swing on a big tree in the front yard. And when we moved, I built a swing set that was 14 feet high. And we were out in the country and on a hillside, and you looked over this beautiful pond when you're up there. So, of course, I also used the swing set. And, you know, if you can remember that you get it going, you usually back up as far as you can and let go, and then you get going faster and faster, slower and slower, and stop. And you also, so that's the first step. There's another important thing about how you get going on the swing. When you're up here, and you at least get going, you come back up here, you haven't gotten very far. And you want to get up there high and fast. What do?
Start pumping your legs.
You pump. When do you pump? Does it matter?
Yes.
Matters a lot, doesn't it? And an amazing thing about swings is that persistent pumping has a lot of effect. You're way up in the air just by that timing. And this is why this moves this way. This is what that fellow was so surprised about, was the impulse is always right at the right time. This thing starts off, he barely just wiggles. And then it gets more and more and more because the pulses are always exactly in sync. So what we're looking at here, this is like going this way is time. Because I'm going to walk along here and I'm just going to mark the voltage, which is proportional to the speed. So really, we could say, I'm going to mark the speed. Yeah. So as I walk along, it's going to go faster and faster and faster, and at some point, it gets as fast as it's going to go. And where is the coil when it's going the fastest?
All the way forward.
Fastest?
At the very
At the bottom.
The bottom. This is one of the, it's odd to stop and think this way, but it's the key to understanding waves, is that the fastest is at the bottom, and then it's slowing down. So I've gone along in time, faster and faster and faster, slower and slower and slower. And where is this where it's 0 speed? I started up here.
All the way back or all the way?
All the way back. When it's up here, suddenly there's this moment, 0. It's still. You have to look fast because it gets going again. So now, though, it's up here coming back down in this magnetic field, and it starts moving in the other direction, going faster and faster and faster till it gets to the bottom again. That's as fast as it's going to go. Time goes by and it's slowing down till it's there. Yeah? So that's a graph of the speed in relation to time. So this is speed, and this is time. And this is also, because of the law of electromagnetism, voltage. So we're going to, next week, have some demonstrations to try and get a handle on this really peculiar aspect of electricity, that there are these two entirely different aspects to it called voltage and current. And really important to understand those two completely different factors and get some sense for what they mean. But right now, we'll concentrate on the voltage aspect, and we'll talk about that more next time. So what we're doing is simply tracking this voltage, which means this is the generator. Yeah, and all we've done is to relate the voltage to the movement of this, and to realize that what happens next over here. What's going to happen? It's going to go up. And will it look anything like this one? Yeah. It'll look exactly like that one, right? So we'd be going just like that one. And this, what we've got is, and you know, if we were to do this accurately for a long time with this particular device, this would get, it would start moving more slowly. And so this would shrink. The heights would shrink. But because the pendulum is always the same, this would stay the same. Yeah? And this, everything after this is a repetition of this one. And so this section right here is called a cycle. And the time that it takes for an entire cycle is the period. This is a cycle if we measure this. It would be a wavelength. This is called one wave. We'll go into this further next time, but basically to look ahead, this is a wave. This whole thing is a series of waves. And this then is the wavelength, and the number of these cycles that happen in a given amount of time is the frequency. One cycle, if it took a minute, I don't know, how many times did this go in a minute? 50, 20? If it happened to be 20 times in a minute, it would be 20 cycles per minute. Yeah? And I think that would probably be a good time to stop this part of it. We'll continue it next week and go into the electricity and then into modulation. The next really important, but we'll go much more thoroughly into this in terms, this is something, we're talking about physical movement here, and electricity itself. We'll go further into literal physical waves in a pond, dropping rocks into a pond, getting even more physical, and then go from that in this direction and then into radio frequency energy propagation. So any questions on this, or any questions? Let me ask you this. How many people have started working on your book or video lessons? Good. You made it. Thank you. So are there, as you do that, anything in there that you would like me to spend some time on unpacking? Let me know. Drop me an email. We can do it two ways. Some of the stuff, just you got a straight question. Send me an email with a question or a text or request for a phone call. The other part, though, is what would be good to spend some class time on. Yeah. So there's a lot of this that will help a lot with that understanding, but I'm not directly trying to respond to those. But I'm quite willing to pull it in and relate what we do here to those questions. And there's a lot in that that's just, as somebody wrote, I felt like I was swimming a bit.
Which videos do you suggest are watching all of them?
The one that I really suggest is the W4EEY Gary Wise. If you put W4EEY in YouTube, and I can just say that I watched a bunch of them. He's also the most, he's the one I strongly recommend. I'll say that several people have written me saying that they really liked it. That was really helpful for them. There were some that I really expected, because I know they're good teachers and they're good YouTubers, but they really didn't cover nearly as much as he did. It's like if you learned it from the book, then seeing the YouTube would be helpful, because he's got, he's a good presenter, but he leaves a lot out. And anybody, there will be places where they're good and places where they're not so good. Gary's very good in general, but there are places where he's not as good. That's just life. And he's got a certain amount of time to do it, and he does a good job. So that's definitely my strongest recommendation. I can say people who want the most thorough is Ham Radio School, which costs $30. You get a book from it and you get lifetime access, and they've got a lot of extra material. They got a lot of really good articles. In their presentation, they've got a PowerPoint presentation that also has audio and visual pop-ups. So he goes a lot further, and for people who are technically minded and really want the whole thing, then I recommend that. But for most people, and the one I enjoyed was Gary Wise. Yeah. And that's free. Another good one.
You guys got finished going through the electrical part of it, learning about the year pi and all that.
So one thing about, of course, there's a bunch of different aspects about it. We're going to be going much more thoroughly into the electrical part than any presenter does that I've seen, except the ones that, the other end of it is the ones who just go bonkers. It's like for upper level physics. And they're more talking for what you ought to know instead of trying to understand. It's my experience. I looked at a number of them hoping to get some help, and just went, oh, no. On the exam, there will be a number of electrical questions. In terms of straight math, you can expect 1 or 2 that have any math on them at all. And you're allowed to miss 9, I think.
Oh man, sounds pretty easy.
So, but the electrical stuff that we will be doing very thoroughly is also the part of it that we're going to be doing is the stuff that is most practical at home and for both just living life and for doing, considering backup power and considering powering your radios. That we're going to do very thoroughly.
How,
The math is gonna be related to Ohm's law, correct? Okay. We'll get into it next week.
There will, that's actually a very good question, and I'm not as, it's likely that that's the case, that what they're calling math questions would include the Ohm's law ones. I know it includes the prefixes, micro, mega, kilo, pico, such one. Pico.
you mentioned it before, probably on your emails, but how long does it class take? I mean, your presentations, is it how many weeks?
3.
3 weekends, I mean 3 Sundays.
Now, I've got, this is the technician class, I've got a number of people who want to go on to the generals, so I expect to do a general class of another couple of months. I strongly encourage people to go on to the general. It's much more difficult. I used ham radio, can't remember right now, but I will get it. There are a number of them where they present the questions and multiple choice answers over and over again. And the ones that are good, and the one that I used, as you get right answers, you see it less often. And one of the things about it is there's stuff on there that you cannot make sense out of, because that's not why it's there. There are times when they just want you to know something. I mean, what's the calling frequency for 2 meters? National calling frequency, 146.260. Well, there's nothing to understand about that. It's just memorizing. And there's one, my God, I didn't know, and it's not like a calling frequency, but I remember it from I don't remember the exact, but it was 7 point something, something, something. And there are 4 possibilities. And none of them have any particular sense to them. It's nothing to understand, it's just know that that question gets this answer. Well, with the course that this one repetitious course, I saw that a lot. And I never learned it. I mean, some people are good at memorizing that abstractly. And I also just didn't try in that particular way because that pissed me off, to tell you the truth. But the fact that you see it that often and get reinforced on it, there's a good chance that when you come to the multiple choice, you don't know the answer, but you hit one of them, and it's probably going to be that one because you've seen it so often.
You got a 25% chance on every question.
Well, you do have that, but I think it really increases the percentage.
Big time, big time.
You can eliminate too.
When I took my test last year, we did find contradictory answers on the test.
There was one they had to fix.
There was actually 4 of them that we came up with in our
Wow.
class. That the information that was taught was not the answer that they wanted on the test. So
they have a revision to the technique I think it's module 6 of the technique. They've got a revision posted.
Good.
And that's a good point. I should pull that up and print it.
Brian told me about that.
Yeah, it was, we're going over, because before we took the test, they literally went over every question and every answer that would be on the test. So every question from the question pool, and we're answering them in real time as he's asking them on the big board.
Wow.
And they were like, no, that's not right. And he's like, well, that's the answer they want for this. You know, and at that point, that's all you can do. You can't fix the tests now. You have to pass the test.
I think it's frowned on to punch the guy out.
Yeah. No, they were very good. They were awesome people. But some of the questions were just wrong.
Yeah. I could mention that for those of you, if you go through, the thing to do is to go through either working with a book or working with a video. You want to do that part. You mostly, especially, want to go through thoroughly one time without trying to learn everything, to get a feel for it, and then start doing practice tests or reviews. because it hones you in, you get used to the way they do it. Well, the next actually, I'm glad I said it this way, because really the better next step is that on especially Ham Study is a wonderful outfit, and their approach is to show the question and the right answer. And their point is, why clog your brain and your time with reading wrong answers? Duh. And that's how they, and also the no nonsense was the first one to do that. I think that the Ham Study did a better job of what they did was they recast the questions into paragraphs that make sense, and Ham Study just did a better job of that. So really, the best thing to do is to read, watch, do the course, and then the review of questions and right answers. And then also at some point do some practice tests. Once you get 80% with practice tests, the 70% is passing, so when you're ready to take the exam. And you know, it's going to be 2 more weeks of classes, and then sometime after that you'll take an exam. Because people are from all around, we could, since people are here, we could put together an in-person exam. Most will these now, because it's available to do it online, sometime soon after, one way or the other, you want to do the exam. But there's, depending on your own process, many people get this in one pass-through on the video and then some review. In any case, there's no reason then not to start reading the general. Because one thing about it, remember, you only need 70%. They give you a free general exam after your technician. You pass the technician, you can sit down, and they will usually encourage you to do that. I had no clue. I hadn't looked at the general, and I got a decent test pass on it. Nowhere near passing because I hadn't, there's stuff I just didn't know. But if you have gotten the study down enough that you're comfortable for the technician, then it makes sense to go on and read for the general. You're dedicating some time now, and you will be getting general content in this class in any case, just because we're trying to understand stuff and not limit it to the technician. And there's no penalty for not making it on the general. No penalty at all. And you can take it again. It doesn't stop anything. There's no charge. Usually $15 is the usual cost for an exam. Some of them are, and there's a whole list online that I think I linked to. Some of them are 10, and there's some even that are 5. So that's for a session. So I know some people, one lady who joined our club, she'd done all 3 of them. She got her extra. She went to sit down and get her technician, passed her general, passed her extra. She had her extra license. Did she know how to operate a radio? No clue.
Oh my God.
That's where I found myself after I passed the technician test. I still haven't really broadcasted at all.
Yeah.
I've been licensed for over a year.
Yeah.
Just haven't used it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know.
I'll get the book knowledge, but not the practical knowledge.
Exactly. So the nets are something that interests me more.
Yeah.
Because then I'm
Exactly.
putting that knowledge into use. So.
And it's most nets are pretty friendly. Most nets are happy to have new people. There is a very real phenomenon that is talked about all the time in ham circles, and it's called mic fright. And I absolutely testify.
I think I've got that.
Oh my God, field day, sit down and, what's my call sign, even if I have it written, and what do you say after that? And
it's not the mic fright, I guess. It's just more so having somebody in particular to reach out to. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
I don't necessarily want to just peruse the
Yeah,
airwaves and
yeah.
hope that somebody chimes in.
right, right,
I'd
yeah,
rather have
I hear you.
a direct contact.
Yep.
Purpose of some point.
Maybe
Yeah.
going on,
Yeah.
hikes and stuff now, we should start checking on what people can do.
Absolutely.
Make sure to text out, whatever you're doing on that.
Absolutely. There's a lot of good.
So you know what that's saying, you're talking about the net
Yes.
that you're gonna set up. So be thinking about what day and time.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
It's actually, you know, all it is naming, and usually you have what's called alternate net control. So you got at least one person who commits to it, and once in a while they send, you know, like the under group just sent out a note.
Oh,
Yes,
did
you
you get,
emailed me.
you got the emails from me? Okay, good. Okay.
Thank you guys.
They
so
just
much.
sent out a note that they.
Appreciate it, Christian. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be here next week, not the following.
Boy, you were a lifesaver.